All right, Shabbosai. Good morning. It is an incredible zchus. Baruch Hashem to learn with all of you. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be there in person, but if you can't be there in person, at least in Eretz Hashem, we could utilize the gift of technology to be able to learn together. So, Shabbosai, today's daf is daf Vav. Page 6, we are picking up on Yomi Beis Elaha, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, about 20 lines up from the bottom. So the Gemara says as follows. We'll say, so remember, actually now in a very interesting sugya about whether or not someone who is chashid al gezel, let's say someone is suspected for engaging in illegal activity, does that automatically invalidate their ability to swear? In other words, do we say essentially that once you're a suspect of negative behavior in one area of halacha, that by definition that ruins your ability to go ahead and take a shvuah? So the Gemara says, but that's what Rabbi Behrman said. So remember, we saw this in yesterday's daf. Rabbi Behrman said that for any of the four shomer, right, a shomer sachar, a shomer chinam, a shoel, and a socher, paid custodian, unpaid custodian, a borrower, and a renter. So the halacha is in order for them to swear regarding the claims. In other words, the case over here is a person deposited an item with one of these four individuals, comes back to claim it back, and they deny it. In order to trigger a shvuah, Rabbi Behrman says there has to be a partial admission, partial denial, partial admission. So the Gemara says, Shomer Chinam, I'm sorry. So Arba Sui Kfir Mixas Vodam Mixas. Shomer Chinam, Bashal, No Say Sachar, Basocher. Name Amigo, the Chashid Amamona Chashid Ashvuah. So I'm going to say, why don't we say that obviously, since these individuals are suspect for engaging in illegal financial activity, right? V'haraya, what's the proof to that? The proof to that is the owner of the object is saying, I deposited my object with you, right? Give it back. And these individuals are saying, we don't have it, or you never gave it to us. So obviously something is up over here. So why don't we say that since they're suspect to be engaging in illegal financial activity, maybe they're suspect that they're going to swear falsely as well, to which the Gemara says, Hasamnami ishtamute kamishtamit. Thereby say also, they could go ahead and kind of create an excuse for themselves. They could create an excuse for lying. What's the excuse? They're not really lying. Rather, they're trying to buy themselves time. How so? So the Gemara says, so let's say, for example, the item was stolen. So the shomer figures, you know what? I'm just going to say that I don't have it. I'm going to go ahead and play detective. I'll find the thief and reclaim the stolen property like that. Inami. Or if it was an animal, for example, that was lost, I'll find another lost animal in the hefker, right, in the swamp, and I'll bring it back. So interestingly enough, even if someone swears, so this almost becomes like reminiscent of Mod B'Miktsas. The whole reason why Mod B'Miktsas we don't say that chashid amamon is chashid al shvuah. If you're suspect regarding illegal financial activity, then maybe you're suspect regarding swearing falsely as well. The reason we don't say that, remember, is because a person has a svara, a person has an excuse, a person has a logic. I'm buying myself time. The Gemara suggests maybe that same logic applies over here. He doesn't mean to lie. He doesn't mean to deny the claim. He's ultimately going to pay back that which he owes. He just needs a little bit of time in order to be able to make that happen. If that's the case, so why don't we say the same thing? Remember in yesterday's daf we saw that if someone denies a pikadon, right? Let's say, for example, Reuven deposited something with Shimon to watch. He comes to claim it back from Shimon, and Shimon says, I don't have it. So now again, one might have thought, so again, the halacha is, that such a person is pasal edus. He's not fit to give testimony. But why? Why don't we say the same thing? Really, he knows that he owes it, but he's buying himself some time. Right? He doesn't have it right now, so he's buying himself some time to be able to find it and give it back. To which the Gemara says, when do we say that if a person denies the existence of the pikadon, that he is unfit to give testimony? When is that? So Gemara says, the cases where witnesses come along and say, Shimon who's denying that he has the pikadon is in his house. The pikadon is in his house. And he knows about it. Or witnesses testify that he has the pikadon in his hand. In other words, what the Gemara is suggesting is, it could be that even when a person denies a pikadon, maybe that wouldn't automatically make him pasal edus, unfit for testimony, because maybe we could say he's lying in order to buy himself time. So what's the case of denial of pikadon that does make you pasal le'edus? And the answer is, when witnesses come along and say he has the pikadon in his house, he has the pikadon in his hand. So in that case, the only reason he'd be lying is in order to keep the pikadon for himself, not in order to buy himself time in order to return it. Incredible. So the Gemara goes right to So remember, we're still the same sugya. Essentially what the Gemara is grappling with over here is, once you're suspect to having engaged in illegal financial activity, does that automatically render you unfit to take an oath or not? So that's the overarching dispute or discussion that we're in. It says, Mashpin also shua she'ena b'shuso. So the Gemara is like this. So Rav Huna, if you take a look at Rashi, this is 3 lines up from the bottom in Rashi. Dam Rav Huna lekaman b'hamafkid gabe sheleima l'ratza l'shava. Amar Rav Huna in bal l'shalei mashpin also shua she'ena b'shuso. Chayshinan shema ein of nasan. So listen to this case. Reuven deposits an object with Shimon. He comes back to reclaim it from Shimon, and Shimon says, I don't have it. So Reuven says, swear. Shimon says, you know what, I don't want to swear, I'm just going to pay you. So Rav Huna says something very interesting. Rav Huna says, we make Shimon take an oath. Right? Why? We're concerned that what happened, Shimon really likes the pikadon. He wants to keep it for himself. So he figured, I'm going to pay him for it. What's the big deal? I'm just going to pay him for it. So Rav Huna says, we make him take a shavua to make sure that he's not hiding the pikadon. Said the Gemara says, why don't we say again, if Shimon is suspect regarding misappropriation of the pikadon, maybe he should be suspect regarding the shvuah as well. So the Gemara says, Hasam nami morev amar damekevnei. So this is very interesting. When Shimon lies about having the pikadon, how does he justify? That was what I was looking for. How does he justify his lie? He says, listen, Reuven's not going to be out anything. I'm willing to pay him. I want to keep the object. So that's why, again, I'm being more heter. I'm making a justification. I'm making an excuse for myself. I'm not really stealing. I'm going to pay him anyway. So therefore, therefore, that's the logic. Where even if he goes ahead and he says, I'm not swearing. I'm just going to pay. Why don't we say that since he's chashud on mammon, he's chashud on shvuah, because we both say, again, here his intention also is not to steal. Here he thinks to himself, since I'm going to pay Reuven money, shalom Yisrael, everything is good. I'm going to back him with difli ravino, v'haka over alav de lo sachmod. This was fascinating. So fine. So let's say in that case over there, maybe Shimon, could justify to himself that he's not stealing from Reuven because he's willing to pay for the object, but he is still in violation of the 10th commandment of not to covet, right? Lo sachmod, he's in violation of that. And I will say, and Rashi points out over here, once he's in violation of an aveira, it doesn't matter what aveira it is, violation of an aveira should make him pasal, should make him unfit to take a shvuah. To which the Gemara says, Lo sachmod le'in shibelo dami mashmid lahu. Because Shimon in this case doesn't even think he's in violation of lo sachmod. Why? Because people think that lo sachmod is only when you covet something but you're not willing to pay for it. But Shimon justifies to himself, look, I'm willing to pay for the object, and therefore again, there's no theft and there's no lo sachmod. So because he has a whole justification for it, therefore halacha l'maisa, this would not render him unfit to give edus. Incredible. Top of Vav Amud Aleph 6a. Ve'la'adam Rav Nachman mashpin also shvuas hasis. So we'll say, so remember again, we saw Rav Nachman in yesterday's daf, that even if a person is kofar bakol, even if Reuven comes over to Shimon gives me $1,000, and Shimon says, I owe you nothing. So on a biblical level, the halacha is Shimon doesn't have to swear because it's kofar bakol. He denies the entire obligation. We said midrabanan is what's called the shvuas hasis. Shvuas hasis is a rabbinic shvuah to encourage people to admit if they're lying. The Gemara says, Neima migo dechashram, I want to chashra shvuah. So, but still, how could we allow Shimon to swear? After all, why don't we say that since he's suspect regarding illegal financial activity, then maybe he's suspect regarding to swearing falsely as well. V'su, furthermore, we'll say this case we had, I believe, on Shabbos, Chenvini al pinkaso. Right? Reuven goes over to the shopkeeper, says to the shopkeeper, Shimon, my employee, I have to pay him. I want to pay him in goods. So give him $1,000 of goods. What happens? So shopkeeper claims that he went ahead and he paid it. Shimon, the employee, claims that he never received anything. Both shopkeeper and Shimon swear that paid, didn't receive, and they both collect from Reuven. Says the Gemara, Nema migo de chachlam amamona chashda shvuasa. Same thing. Why do we say, listen, obviously there's suspicion over here that shopkeeper and or Shimon are lying. So why do we say that the same way that they're chashid to lie, maybe ultimately they're chashid to take a shvuah as well. They shouldn't take a shvuah. So the Gemara says, V'su. The Gemara is just piling all this on. V'su. Furthermore, Hadam Rav Sheish says, Shalosh shvuos mashbi'en also. Suppose this is an interesting case. This is a case of, Rashi points out, of a shomer chinam. If Reuben entrusted Shimon with an object to watch it, and Shimon is an unpaid custodian, Shimon now claims that the object was stolen. Now, technically speaking, if an object is stolen, a shomer chinam is pater. So we'll say there are 3 oaths that we administer to the shomer chinam before absolving him of responsibility. What are they? Number 1, shvuah shelo pashati. He swears that I was not negligent. Shelo pashati ba. Shvuah shelo shalachti ba yad. He swears that he did not misappropriate it for his own use. And shvuah she'ena b'shusi. And he swears that the object is not in my domain. I nima amigo de chachna mamona chashashua. Suppose it's the same question. Why don't we say over here also? Obviously, there's something amiss, right? There's something amiss. We're concerned that maybe the shomer stole. So why don't we say that since the shomer is suspect of financial misappropriation, that he should not be able to take a shvuah as well? To which the Gemara says, Ella lo aminan migo de chashna mamona chashada shvuasa. So we'll say, the Gemara says, all of this leads to one conclusion, which is that we do not say that just because someone is suspect of financial mispropriety, right? That's the right word, right? Financial inappropriateness, right? Financial misconduct, that doesn't automatically mean that they are unable to swear. In other words, we'll say what we do is we bifurcate, we divide it up. And this is incredibly, we've spoken on this concept many times before, that essentially what the halacha is saying is like this. Just because a person acts inappropriately in one area, doesn't mean they're going to act inappropriately in all areas. So it could very well be that a person is under a cloud of suspicion of financial misappropriation, but that does not automatically mean that we are concerned that he is the kind of person who is going to lie under oath, that he's going to take a false shvuah. We divide those two things. And I will say, of course, we've spoken on this before, in a profound Musar Haskell, this is very good news for us because most of us, our lives fit into this very construct. Meaning, there are certain things that I do that I should not do, and certain averus that I commit that I should not commit. But the averus that I do commit does not invalidate my cheskes kashrus, my proper standing in other areas of life and other areas of halacha. So while it's true that I am imperfect and broken in certain areas, what I want more than anything is for that broken kite not to eclipse all of the other parts of my life. And that's essentially what the Gemara is saying over here. We could bifurcate, we could segment, we could kind of put things in different buckets. There are areas in which I am broken and deficient, but that broken kite and that deficiency does not go ahead and eclipse all of the other positive things that I'm doing in life. Incredible. Abaye Amar. Abaye says no. Abaye says, Abaye Amar, Chashin and Shalma Milva Yeshana Yesh La'alav. All right, so we'll say, so now we're going back for a second. Abaye is going back to the Mishnah. Abaye is going back to the Mishnah. Take a look at Rashi just a moment. Abaye Amar, Taimad Demas Nisin Lav Kid Rabbi Yochanan. So I will say, so remember again, Rabbi Yochanan wanted to say that the reason of the Mishnah was that we don't want every single person grabbing onto the property of someone else and claiming it's theirs. Therefore, the shvuah comes along and kind of acts as a mechanism to discern who's telling the truth, who's not telling the truth. Abaye has a different approach. Abaye says we need the shvuah for another reason. We're both say, watch this. Let's say, for argument's sake, Reuven lent Shimon $1,000. Reuven lent Shimon $1,000. Shimon forgot all about the debt, and Reuven doesn't have eidos, and Reuven doesn't have a shtar. So now what happens? Reuven sees that Shimon has a very expensive cloak. So Reuven figures, I'm going to chop it right. I'm going to grab onto that cloak. Grab onto that cloak, claim that it's half mine. Now, Reuven's lying. The cloak is not half his. But Reuven figures if I could recapture 50% of that cloak, that'll pay me back for the old loan that Shimon owes me. And I will say, and again, Reuven could justify this oath. Why? Because the truth is, he really does own 50% of the value of this cloak. Again, nothing to do with the cloak, but having to do with the old debt. So that's Abaye Amar Chashir, and that's why that's why you have the shvuah. So the oath is there. The oath is there because the hope is that as much as Reuven could justify grabbing onto the cloak, it's going to be much harder for him to justify swearing about actual ownership in the cloak itself. So Abaye Amar Chashin and Shema Milva Yeshana Yesh Lo Alav. Iachi nishkal below shvuah. If that's the case, then maybe Reuven should be able to take his 50% even without a shvuah. Ela chashinon shema safek milva yeshana yesh lo alav. So rather what we're concerned over here is as follows. We're concerned that maybe there's a suffix. In other words, maybe there's the possibility that Reuven had an old debt against Shimon, and that's what's driving him to go ahead and hold on to 50% of the cloak and claim that it's 50% his. And therefore, the point of the shvuah is as much as Reuven could justify seizing Shimon's property, claiming it as his own in satisfaction of the old debt, Reuven's not going to swear to that. He's not going to swear to that. He's not going to swear that he owns 50% of the cloak because that would be untrue. So the Gemara says, "V'lav amrinan tafis mamona misafek mishtabenai misafek." Now I will say, does that mean, do we not say that if a person seizes money out of doubt, that will make him swear out of doubt as well? Misafek, Rav Sheshes Braid Rav Idi, parshi inshi misafek shvuah, v'lo parshi misafek mamona. This is incredible. A person in general will distance themselves from a suffix shvuah. Let me say it differently. A person will not distance themselves from a suffix moment. In other words, we'll say, if let's say Reuven's not sure, let's say Reuven thinks that Shimon owes him money, but he's not 100% sure. So even if he's not sure, he'll still grab the cloak in order to claim 50% of the cloak in satisfaction of the possibility that there was an old debt. But a person won't swear unless they're 100% sure about the claim. Why the distinction? My time, it's very simple. Mamon ise bechazara, shvuah lese bechazara. A very simple distinction. If it turns out that Reuven remembers different things, you know what? Shimon didn't owe me money, or Shimon paid me back the money. What's the good news? What could Reuven do? Give Shimon back the money. Sheleima Yisroel. But if Reuven takes a shvuah, if Reuven takes an oath, and again, then it turns out that, you know what, Shimon didn't owe me the money, there's no, so to speak, no backseas on that, right? That is an irrevocable, irreversible process. So therefore, a person would be willing to seize money out of doubt. Maybe Shimon owes me for a past loan. I remember something, I can't remember clearly, because if I'm wrong, I can give it back, but he wouldn't take a shvuah. Incredible. So I will say, just want to point out what's just happened over here. So essentially, here's what we have. We know the case of the Mishnah, right? Shnaim Elchsa Metalis, Ze Omer Ani Mitzasiya V'Kula Shali, Ze Omer Ani Mitzasiya V'Kula Shali. That's the case of the Mishnah. So what is the halacha? The halacha is they both swear, as we saw in yesterday's daf, they both swear that they have no less than a half, right? I have ownership interest, and my ownership is no less than 50%. Why do we have, and then they split it. Why do we have the shvuah? So two possibilities. Rabbi Yochanan, who wanted to say that halacha l'maisa, excuse me, Rabbi Yochanan wanted to say that this shvuah is there in order that people don't just grab the property of their friend, of their fellow, and claim that it's their own. Abaye introduced us to another possibility that maybe it's because we're concerned that maybe Reuven has an old debt against Shimon, or the possibility of an old debt against Shimon, and he's grabbing onto this property in order to go ahead and pay back that old debt. Misafek. He doesn't remember all the details clearly. Once there's a shvuah, that will prevent him ultimately from engaging in this process. Incredible. By Rabbi Zera, we'll say another interesting case. Takfa echa befanenu mahu. So we'll say, now watch this. So let's say same case in the Mishnah. Reuven and Shimon are holding on to the cloak. Now, we'll have to explain the case over here, but literally Rabbi Zera asks as follows. Let's say Reuven, so they're in Beis Din, right? Reuven and Shimon are holding on to the cloak, and they're in Beis Din. In Beis Din, Reuven grabs it from Shimon. Okay, so what's the halacha? Mao, hechidami. So what's the case? Either shasek adui odile. So if Reuven grabs it from Shimon and Shimon doesn't say anything, that's pretty much an admission that Shimon is saying that Reuven is the owner and I am not. And if Shimon cries out, say, hey, you just took my cloak, okay, so then he cried out. In other words, then obviously Beis Din has to adjudicate the case. Why does it matter that Reuven pulled it out from Shimon? Well, tzricha, listen to this, the shasek meikar of a hadar tzavach. We'll say, what's the case? Reuven and Shimon walk into Beis Din, they're both holding the cloak. Reuven grabbed it out of Shimon's hands. At first, Shimon is silent, and then afterwards, Shimon cries out. To which the Gemara says, so how do we understand this? Mai, midi ishtek, oduye odle. Do we say that since Shimon was quiet, initially, he essentially admitted that Reuven is the owner of the cloak? Odilma, keven the katzava, hashta iglai milsa, the haidishasik meikara, savar haka chazule rabano. Or maybe not. Maybe since Shimon ultimately does cry out afterwards, and the reason he was silent initially was why? All of this is happening in front of Beis Din. It's happening in front of the Dayanim. So Shimon says, I don't have to say anything. The Dayanim, the judges, see exactly what's going on over here, and they're effectively going to advocate on my behalf. It's only afterwards that he realized, what's going on over here? And then he cries out. So we will say, so which one is this? Do we look at his initial silence as simply the fact that Shimon essentially is Moda, admits that Reuven is the owner of the cloak? Or no, his initial silence is just because he felt he didn't have to lodge, he didn't have to cry out. This is happening in front of Beis Din. Beis Din will take care of it. So that's the Shaila. Nachman says, Tashma. When is this so? Say, when is what? So when is the halacha in Mishnah that cholkin v'shvuah b'sheshneim adukin ba? That's when both Reuben and Shimon are holding on to the cloak. Aval haisa talis yotzes mitachas yado shel echad she'achem mehen. They both say if the talis. Let's say they walk into Beis Din, Reuben's holding the talis, and Shimon says, wait, 50% of that is mine. Then what's the halacha? Hamotzi mechabeiro alav haraya. That's not our Mishnah. So again, comes along Rav Nachman says our Mishnah is dafka when both Reuben and Shimon are actually holding on to the talis. But if Reuben walks in with the talis and Shimon says, hey, 50% of that is mine, we say, get out of here. Maybe not literally, but right? In other words, Shimon, you want to extract property from Reuben, you could do so, but the burden of proof is upon you. To which the Gemara says again, hey chidami, what's the case? So we'll say, if it's just as the case is written, so pshita. Obviously, again, if Reuben's walking in with the talis under his arm, Shimon doesn't have anything, and Shimon's claiming that it is his, then of course Shimon doesn't have a legitimate claim. So what's going on over here? Ella shetakfa echad bifanenu. Rather, it must be the case is what? It must be that the case is where Reuben and Shimon were both holding it, and Reuben pulled it out of Shimon's hands. To which the Gemara says, "Lo, that's not the case." Also, listen to this. The case is where Reuben and Shimon come into Beis Din both holding on to the cloak, and what happens? We va'amrina lahu zilu plugu. So Beis Din tells Reuben and Shimon, "Okay, split the cloak." The nafku, they leave, they go out, and they come back in. Va'hadar asu, they come back in. Kitafis lechad menayu, and when they come back in, only Reuben is holding the cloak. So what happened? Hi Amr Aduye Odili. So Reuben says, the reason I'm the one who's holding the cloak is because when we left Beis Din, Shimon admitted that I was the true owner, and that's why I'm holding it. The Hi Amr Bidami Egarti Nehele. So we'll say, and Shimon says, no, he's not the owner, but rather I rented my half to him. That's why he's holding the whole talis. To which the Gemara says, in this case, Da'amrin Alei, Ad Hashta Chashara Tele Begazlon, the Hashta Mugeres Le Below Sahadi. We say to Shimon, sorry, buddy, we don't believe you. Just a few minutes ago, you were in Beis Din claiming that Reuven was stealing your cloak, that it was all yours. Now suddenly you leave Beis Din and you're renting him your portion, and there's no documentation and there's no testimony. That doesn't make any sense. Rather, the only we could conclude is that when they left Beis Din, Shimon admitted to Reuven that Reuven is the true owner, and that is why Reuven is the one who's holding it, and Shimon has nothing. Incredible. The other possibility is Kidiktani, the Asula Kamon, Kitafas Lechad Minayu. Oh, sorry, maybe the other possibility is like this. Maybe Reuven and Shimon walk into Beis Din, and Reuven's holding the cloak, and Shimon is not. So the Gemara says, V'idach Misrach Ba Seruchi. And what happens? So we'll say, so literally again, Shimon is kind of like grabbing onto the edges. Misrach leisruche. So the Gemara says, what is this? We'll say first the wide lines on the bottom. And even according to Sumchus, who normally says that whenever you have a doubt in a monetary claim, we just split it without a shvuah. So the Gemara says, Moda Sumchus de Sircha Lav Klumhu. Sumchus holds that when you have one party holding on to the cloak and the other party kind of grabbing at the edges, no, that's not an equal claim. And ultimately, again, the cloak will rest with Reuven, and if Shimon wants to extract a portion, Hamotzi mechaveiro alav haraya. Incredible. So goes weiter. Vim tim tzlomer tokfa echa befaninu motzil osa miyado hekdisho ena mikudeshes. So we'll say, listen to this. So remember, let's take a step back. So now, essentially, the case that the Gemara was trying to clarify was the following scenario. Reuven and Shimon are standing in Beis Din, right? They're both holding the cloak. Reuven goes ahead and pulls it back from Shimon. So they both say, based on what we saw before, that halacha l'maaseh in that kind of case, so Beis Din would still adjudicate the case. So the Gemara says something very interesting. The Gemara says, if you say, right, let's say you go to the approach, that let's say when Reuven pulls it out of Shimon's hands, Mosian oso miyado. That we would not let Ruvain, we don't say, okay, Ruvain, we just saw what you did. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, we're still going to adjudicate the case as if it's Ruvain and Shimon holding the cloak together. In other words, the fact that Ruvain grabbed it out of Shimon's hands doesn't in any way bolster Ruvain's claim. This is still a case of Shnaim Ochsim Betalis. If we say that, then watch this. Hikdisha and Nikudeshas. So let's say again, after Ruvain were to grab it from Shimon, if Shimon were to be makdish it, right? Shimon were to consecrate. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Shimon were to consecrate without holding on to it. The halacha would be in mikudeshas. Ultimately, again, there's no hagdish. Why? Look at Rashi. In mikudeshas, the lo olim hagdisha mitkafa. Shabbos says, so if we hold, so watch this idea. So if halacha l'maisa, we say that if you go ahead and you grab it from someone, you're not the sole owner of it. So that would bepashtos mean that halacha l'maisa, even if one of the parties were to be makdish it, let's say the one who wasn't holding it were to be makdish it, the hektish would not work. So the Gemara says furthermore, intim salomar takfa echa befanenu in motzino samiyado. But we'll say, but if you say that when one of the parties grabs it from the other, we do not extract it from the grabber. We don't extract it from the grabber. Then hekdisha below. Hekdisha below takfa mahu. What happens if the party ultimately, again, who doesn't have control over it, is makdish it? Kevan damar mar amirasa legava ki misirasa lehedyodami. So we'll say, since in generally we say that verbal commitment to hekdish is the equivalent of giving something over in a non-hektish transaction. Therefore, again, kiman de takfa dama. That therefore, again, even the one who's not holding it is as if he is holding it. O dilma hashta mihalo takfa. Or maybe not. Maybe at the end of the day, since Shimon is not holding it, if he's not holding it, he doesn't have the ability to be makdish it. So we'll say, it's a very, very interesting halacha over here, right? So in other words, so halacha, the Gemara is saying is like this. If you go with the approach that when Reuven grabs it out of Shimon's hands, let's say again, right? So in motzino somiyado, we're not going to go ahead and take it from Reuven. Okay, so let's say, if we, good, okay. Fine. So we'll say, so there's a Rashi, okay, if we know it, we'll leave it for now. So let's say again, halacha l'maisa, we say that if Reuven were to grab it from Shimon, we're not extracted from Reuven. So now the shayla is, if Shimon were to be makdish, he says, you know what, I still protest, I own 50% of this, and I'm makdish it. So we'll say, would that hekdish work or not? So what's the havamina to say that it would? Well, to say that it wouldn't, he doesn't have possession of it. To say that it would is the concept of amiraso legavoa kimisiraso lehedyot. In general, verbal commitment to hekdish is the equivalent of physically giving something over in a regular mundane circumstance. So maybe verbal commitment to hekdish on the part of Shimon, even though he's not physically holding the object, is enough to make it hekdish. So the Gemara says, O Dilma, let's finish it. O Dilma, Hashtem Yahol Sakfa. On the other hand, Shimon's not in possession of it. And since he's not in possession of it, Uksiv, V'ish ki yakdish as Beso Kodesh. The Pasuk says if a person will consecrate his home, Ma Beso Bishuso, just like your home is in your Rishos, Af Kol Bishuso. So too, what can you be makdish? You can only be makdish something that is in your Rishos. La Fuki Hai, Dilo Bishuso. That would come to exclude this cloak, which at this point is not in Shimon's Rishos because Reuven grabbed the whole thing. So we'll say, so that's the shayla. That's the shayla. If you hold that when Reuven grabs it out of Shimon's hands, the Beis Din is not going to remove it from Reuven. Let's say we say that. Then if Shimon was to be makdish, his chelek, would that work or not? On one hand, amiraso legavoa kemisiraso lehedyot. Verbal commitment to hektish is just like giving something over to a mundane transaction. On the other hand, maybe you could only make something hektish if it's physically in your possession. So let's analyze. Tashma. So what's the Gemara? What's the Braisa? This dahahi, very Bava on base 6b. But say great case. Dahi masusa dahavu menatzi alua beitre. There was a bathhouse. That two people were fighting over. Reuven and Shimon were both claiming ownership over the bathhouse. Hi Amar Didihu. So Reuven said, it's my bathhouse. The Hi Amar Didihu. Shimon said, it's my bathhouse. Kam Chad Minayu Akdisha. Reuven got up, excuse me, and Reuven was makdish. Reuven consecrated the bathhouse. Okay, so what happened? Par Shimini Rabbi Chananya, Rabbi Oshia, V'kul Rabbanon. the rabbis stopped using the bathhouse. The rabbi said, now what do you see from there? What do you see from there? The pashtus, what that sounds like is that even though the bathhouse, let's say, so again, Reuven and Shimon are arguing over it. Shimon decides not to be makdish it. So even though the bathhouse, so to speak, was not in Shimon's possession, he was makdish it, and the rabbi stopped using it, which sounds like you can be makdish something even if it's not in your physical possession. And more than that, even if the ownership of that object is contested. And Rabbi Moshe said to Rabbi, listen, when you go to visit Rav Chisda, right, go in Kafri. Kafri, Rashi says, Shem Makom is the name of a place. When you go to visit Rav Chisda, ask him this question. Ask him about this case. When he came to Surah, Rav Hamnuna said, Masnisinhi, this is a Mishnah. What's the Mishnah? Interesting case here. Safek Bechoros. Well, so let's say you have a case of a Safek Bechor. Right? Echad Bechor. So Echad Bechor Adam ve'Echad Bechor Behema. So Rabbi says, remember again, if you have a firstborn male child, this Pidyon Aben, firstborn animal that goes to the Kohen. Let's say you have a Safek Bechor. Again, you're not sure if this kid is the child, is the pet Arachem for his mother, is the firstborn of his mother or not, or this animal is with the firstborn. So what do you do with it? So the Gemara says, Bein Torah and Bein Tmeim. So whether we're talking about kosher animals, non-kosher animals, because remember again, I will say, so for example, the only non-kosher animal that has firstborn consecrated status, of course, is a donkey, is a pater chamar. But again, so you're not sure, is this animal a bechor or not? Is this child the bechor or not? So what's the halacha? Hamotzi mechaver alav haraya. Okay, so we'll say this is very interesting. So what do we say? We say hamotzi mechaver alav haraya. The burden of proof is upon the extractor. Now, who's the extractor? Right? Who's the muchsak? Who's the extractor? Look at Rashi. Hamotzi mechavero kasak adaitcha im biad Yisrael havikoy metzi mechavero alav haraya vim takfa kohen b'shasak Yisrael b'hadar tzavach Yisrael motzi mechavero. So we'll say. So watch this. So we see like this. If the Yisrael ultimately, again, so let's focus on animals right now, right? So we'll call him Yisrael, right? So Yisrael has an animal, and he's not sure if it's a firstborn animal or not. Okay, so what does he do? So the Gemara says, "Hamotzi mechaber alav haraya," which means what? If the Yisrael has it, then halacha l'maisa, the burden of proof is upon the Kohen to prove that this is a firstborn animal. But let's say the Kohen sneaks in the middle of the night, grabs the animal for himself. He claims it's a bachar, it's mine. In that case, the burden of proof is going to be on the Yisrael to show that it's not a firstborn animal. So essentially, whoever has it, he's considered to be the muchsak, the one who owns it, and the one who extracts it, or the one who wants to extract it, has the burden of proof. Tani Allah, and yet we learned about this, asurim begiza va'avoda. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. That even though this animal, right, this firstborn animal is a Safek Bachar, it is nevertheless, you are not allowed to shear it and you're not allowed to work it. So I will say, look at Rashi, Asurim begiza v'avoda, misafek shemakot shimhei. It's very interesting. You're not allowed to work this animal or shear this animal out of a Safek. Maybe it's consecrated. So I will say, now watch this. V'tani, right, Asurim begiza v'avoda. V'ha, damar tak f'kohen, ein motzino so biyado. So we'll say, one second, we just said before, but let's say the Kohen, tuck for Kohen. We'll say, by the way, just like Halich is another sugya that's like a major sugya with a lot to talk about, tuck for Kohen is also another major sugya, but again, I want to be consistent. I didn't do Halich justice, so I don't want tuck for Kohen to feel left out as well. We're just going to go with a simple understanding of Rashi. So therefore, again, in the case of tak v'kohen, where the Kohen grabs the animal, right? So the Kohen went in, the Kohen took the Safek firstborn animal, took it for himself. Remember, we wouldn't extract it from the Kohen, because now that the Kohen took it, he is the muchsak. So what do you see? Even if the Kohen did not seize it, the animal is still asur, you're not allowed to shear it, and you're not allowed to go ahead and work it. Take a look at Rashi. V'chilo sakvu chamar koach hektish. So chamar koach hektish. Sorry, not chamar. Chamar koach hektish. V'oso begiza v'shmamina. V'imtin tzor takva emotzino sumiyado hektish mikudeshas. So we'll say. So watch this. So we'll say. So now, what do you see from here? You see from here that even if the Kohen did not seize the animal, so the Safek Bachar is in the reshus of the Yisrael. Yet what? It's aser begiza va'avoda. You can't shear it and you can't go ahead and work it. What do you see from here? You see from here that you have the ability to be makdish something even if it's not in your possession. Because so to speak, it's in the Yisrael's possession, it's not in the Kohen's possession, yet despite that, the animal still has Kedusha. So let's take this back. So remember, what did we say before? We said before, so let's go back, 2 cases. Right? If you say that when Reuven goes ahead and pulls the object away from Shimon, if we give it back, if we pull it out of Reuven's hand and give 50% back to Shimon, so obviously Shimon can be makdish it, because Shimon's going to have possession. However, what's our shayla? Our shayla is, in the case of takfa in motzion also, in a case where Reuven pulled it out of Shimon's hands, and let's say we paskin that when you pull it out of someone's hands, we don't give it back to Shimon. Does Shimon still have the ability to be makdish it? That's our question. Does he have the ability to consecrate it even though it doesn't have physical possession? It appears, based on what we just learned, that the answer to that question should be yes. Why? Because in the case of Safek Bechar, even if the Yisrael retains it, so the Kohen didn't take it, right? The Yisrael retains it. So because the Yisrael has it, if the Kohen wants it, it's a Motzei Mechaber Lavaraya, but yet despite that, you're not allowed to shear it, you're not allowed to work it. What does that show you? That shows you that even something not in your possession, it's not in the possession of the Kohen, yet still it has Kedusha. So we'll say, so the Pashas that would tell us that even in the case of Takva in Motzion also, even if we pass down, when Reuven pulls the talis out of Shimon's hand, let's say we don't extract it from Reuven, but yet it would appear that Shimon still has the ability to be makdish it. Incredible. To which the Gemara says, no. Amalei Rabba. Rabba says, absolutely not. Kedushas Bechar Ka'amrit, it's apples and oranges. This is Kedushas Bechar. To which the Gemara says, Kedushas Bechar Ka'amrit, the Olav Emolacha, Takfu Kohen Motzian Osomiyado. Plus, it could very well be that in a general case, if a Kohen seizes something, right, we would take it back from the Kohen. Va'afilu hachi, or in this case, even if the Kohen, let's say again, I'm the Yisrael, I have this animal that's a Safek Bechar. Kohen sneaks into my pen in the middle of the night and steals this animal, takes the animal. I don't want to say steals, takes the animal because he feels he's entitled to it. Even if we were to say that the halacha is that we take it back from the Kohen and give it back to me, the animal is still going to be aser in giza va'avoda, still going to be aser in shearing and in working. Why? The kedusha haba me'eleh shayni. Rabbi said this is incredible because the kedusha of Bechar is a different kind of kedusha. Kedusha of Bechar is an innate kedusha. In the world of kedusha, there are 2 different types of kedusha. There's conferred kedusha, right? You take a mundane item and you make it kaddish, you confer kedusha upon it, and then there's innate kedusha, right? Intrinsic kedusha. Bechar falls into the latter category, right? Bechar is innate kedusha. So the Gemara is suggesting, or actually Rabbi is suggesting over here, that maybe the reason why we're going to be machmir with this animal, that even if the Yisrael is holding onto it, and even if the Kohen were to grab it, right, we would take it back from the Kohen and give it back to the Yisrael, you still can't shear it, you still can't work it. Why? Because it's a safek about an innate kedusha, an inherent kedusha, kedusha me'aleh. An innate or inherent kedusha is more machmir than conferred kedusha. Fascinating halacha. So I'll take a look at Rashi. Rashi says the olam emelacha gabi bechar dafilu takva kohen motzino samiyado mistam v'cheskas Yisrael hein. Maybe you'll say even if the kohen does seize this animal, we'll take it back from the kohen, give it back to the Yisrael. Or the olam kohen kari motz mechabero. The time of the giza avoda la mishum dihele kohen shum koach behen. The tiv shom elehecha. The takva imotzi miyado akdesha. Okay, so essentially the Gemara saying is like this. One more time. So I'll just tell you Rashi outside. We're suggesting maybe we paskin takva kohen that if the kohen seizes this animal, no, you can't do that kohen. It's a Safek Bechar. You don't have a right in Safek Bechar. We give it back to the Yisrael. Even so, this is a case of Safek inherent Kedusha, what we call Kedusha me'eleha, inherent or intrinsic Kedusha. That Kedusha is treated with greater stringency, and therefore even al Safek, you still can't shear the animal and you still can't work the animal. But I will say, that would be different than our case in Amud Aleph, because in our case we're talking about conferred Kedusha. Maybe when it comes to conferred Kedusha, if it's not in your possession, you don't have the ability to create it. So the Gemara says, Amarlei, Rav Chanani l'Rabba, so Rav Chanani said to Rabba, Taim de Metzia, there's a rice that supports you. Hasfekos nichnasin l'dir lihis aser. So we'll say the halacha is, what if you have Safek animals? So we'll say, we'll talk about this. We'll talk about this that, let's say again, so Rashi actually points out that the Gemara in the next daf is going to clarify this case. But I will say essentially, Rashi says over here, "Sveikos the kamam mefarish besafik pidyon petach hamar the mafrish alav tala laf kuye isura." So I will say it's an interesting case over here. So let's say again, we're talking about a situation where I have a suffix firstborn donkey. I want to redeem that donkey with a sheep. So now I redeem it with a sheep, but that sheep again is also suffix because you don't know was the donkey consecrated or not. So let's answer. So what do you do with this redemption animal, with the sheep? You put it into the pen, and it becomes part of the calculation for your meiser behemoth, for your animal tithe. Versus 1 second. Now, if you would hold in general in a suffix case, a suffix kedusha case, then if the coin takes the animal, you don't extract it from him. So then how could I be Yisrael take this animal, which was used for the redemption of the suffix firstborn donkey, and put it in my pen for meiser behemoth? Nimsa ze poter mamona b'mamona shel kohen. Both say it turns out that I'm exempting my obligation of meiser behemoth potentially with the animal of the kohen. Abai says, no. Don't actually bring up this case. That case is not helpful for you. Why? So Meir says, what's the case over here? Kigon the case over here, both says, where you only have 9 animals, and the 10th animal is this sheep that was used to redeem the suffix peter chamar. So the Gemara says, the manashach ibar chiyuv v'hir shapir. So we say manashach means what? In other words, either way, if the sheep that was used for the redemption of the suffix firstborn donkey, so if that sheep really belongs to me, then good. Then I have a chavra of 10, and then I can take meiser behemoth. So the Gemara says, Shabbat Aser, ilav bar chiyuvahu. But if halacha l'maisa again, that tithe animal, or I should say, that sheep that was used to redeem the suffix peter chamar, if ultimately again that animal is not subject to tithing, then hatishahu. Then ultimately all they have is 9 animals anyway, and 9 animals is not subject to the laws of tithing. Tishahu la bar isura ninhu. So we'll say ultimately again, therefore it's not subject to ma'aseh. So we'll say we'll pause over here for now. So just understand what we have over here. So let's say what we're trying to figure out over here is as follows. Just understand how we got here. The way we got here was if you hold that when Reuben grabs it from Shimon, that we do not extract it back from Reuben to give it back from Shimon. If Shimon were to be makdish, what was his chilek, would that hektish work? The Gemara wanted to suggest from the case of takfa kohen that ultimately, again, that if you hold, right, that halacha l'maisa, we wanted to say that from the case of takfa kohen, in the case of takfa kohen, even if the kohen did not go ahead and seize it, it's still asr begiza va'avoda, which shows you that you can be makdish something that is in your reshus. To which the Gemara essentially says that halacha l'maisa, no. You're mixing apples and oranges. The question was asked in a case of conferred kedusha, and you're trying to bring a proof from a case of inherent or innate kedusha. And the Gemara is just suggesting those 2 cases of kedusha are really separate and distinct. So Rabbi Chanai said to Rabbah, I have a brisa that supports you. At the end of the day, ultimately, again, it doesn't appear that brisa was as supportive ultimately again as we originally thought. Now, Abaye issued his understanding. Abaye is going to retract his understanding, but we'll save Abaye's retraction Meir Hashem for tomorrow. But I just want to spend a minute, because I kind of left you off mid-thought over here. These 2 categories of kedusha are absolutely incredible. So there's conferred kedusha and there's innate kedusha. And the truth is, if you think about it, a Yid, the Jew, has these very same levels of kedusha. On one hand, each of us has an innate kedusha, right? How do we start? Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. I am the child of the avos and the imos. I am the descendant of those who said Na'aseh v'nishmat har Sinai, which means that by definition, I have inherent kedusha. I have innate kedusha. Adam is made b'tselem Elokim. Adam is made in the image of God, and therefore, by definition, I have innate kedusha. But at the end of the day, in life, it's not just enough to go ahead and rely on your innate kedusha. You want to create conferred kedusha. Conferred kedusha comes about as a result of the dynamic activity you engage in. the positive decisions you make, the lifestyle choices you make, the things I choose to do and the things I choose not to do. The challenge in life is that all too often we're satisfied with our innate kedusha, right? Okay, I'm kaddish. I know that I'm kaddish. I'm innately kaddish, but that's not enough. That's not enough. Life is all about taking your innate kedusha and then building upon it by conferring upon yourself additional levels of kedusha. Every mitzvah, every chesed, every blat gemara, some way, somehow adds to my additional heightened levels of conferred kedusha. Celebrate the innate kedusha, but don't be satisfied with that. Every day, figure out how to confer additional kedusha upon yourself. All right, we'll stop over here for today. So I'm kind of leaving off. You'll see why tomorrow's life. I'm leaving off over here because although Abaye walks back that which he just said, it leads into the next sugya. Again, I miss all of you. It's just, as much as I love learning with you remotely, such a better feeling to learn it together in person. See everybody Wednesday morning. Shkoyach everyone and have a great day.